Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Murakaza Neza, a space where we go beyond official narratives and glossy headlines to examine what is really happening in Rwanda. I am your host, Denise Zaneza, and as always, it is an honor to guide you through these vital and often uncomfortable conversations. Today's episode focuses on the reality that is increasingly shaping people's lives, voices, and freedoms. The topic of digital repression in Rwanda. Under Paul Kagame's dictatorship, human rights violations have moved online. The digital space, once seen as a tool for connection, participation, and opportunity, has become a powerful instrument of control, surveillance, censorship, criminalization of online speech, harassment of critics, and intimidation that crosses borders are now central elements of repression. This is not speculation. These patterns are clearly documented in a stakeholder report submitted to the United Nations Universal Periodic Review, which exposes how freedom of expression, privacy, and digital safety have sharply deteriorated in Rwanda. To help us unpack these findings, understand their real-world impact, and explore what they mean for activists, journalists, human rights defenders, and ordinary citizens, I am joined today by Patricia Ainembabazi. Patricia is a policy and advocacy officer, and her work sits at the critical intersection of technology, human rights, and civic space. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Before we dive into our conversation, for those who don't know you, who is Patricia Ainembabazi?
Oh, thank you. I think you already did more of the introduction about me. I'm a Ugandan. I work with CIPESA as the Policy and Advocacy Officer. And for those that may not know what CIPESA is, it stands for the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. We are headquartered here in Kampala, Uganda, but we do work with researchers and lawyers and human rights activists across the African continent and beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your short, amazing resume with us, and clearly the perfect person for today's conversation. And could you explain to our audience how digital technology can enable or amplify human rights violations, and also how someone can recognize once one's rights have been violated through technology?
Great. I think the first thing we need to understand is what are digital rights, because it's the same basket as human rights, but these are rights that extend to online spaces. And maybe what I did not mention before is that I've been working in these human rights spaces for the last 9 years or so, both at national level, regional level, and the international level. And from what we've been seeing as offline violations, they do trickle down to online, since the internet or the digital sphere has grown to be large and most used on the African continent and beyond. So what would amount as a violation? You just have to look at it as what amounts as a human rights violation, and then now shift it to what is online. It could be a violation on expression, way of sharing information, and so forth. So if you ask what that means for different communities, it takes different shapes and forms, right? And what we do at CIPESA is, and with other partners also, is to help to do the capacity building, teaching people what a violation looks like, and what the good use of the internet looks in regards to human rights. And again, when you look at the legal spheres or the legal instruments that govern the whole sector, it's the same, whether offline or online, it's the same human rights, but just these are rights that are enjoyed in online spaces.
Yes, that is very clear. And so your organization, CIPESA, you submitted a joint report to the United Nations on human rights in the digital context and on Rwanda. as part of the Universal Periodic Review. And for our listeners who may not be familiar with the UN UPR, could you explain in short what it is and what your organization hopes to achieve through this submission?
As a human rights advocate and a policy practitioner, I engage with the UPR, or the Universal Periodic Review, as a strategic accountability mechanism to advance human rights in the digital age across Africa.
Yes.
Now, if someone does not know what a UPR is, it's a United Nations human rights monitoring process through which human rights records of every UN member state is reviewed on a rotating basis, and it is conducted under the United Nations Human Rights Council. And typically, it takes place every 4 to 5 years for each country. The process is designed to be universal, peer-driven, and cooperative, meaning that countries assess each other's human rights performances and make recommendations on areas that need improvement. In a short form, you can look at it as checks and balances when it comes to human rights practices across different UN member states. Yeah, I just wanted to say, much as we do at CIPESA, we contribute to and present civil society UPR submissions. We do participate in the pre-sessions in Geneva, and also engage diplomatic missions to surface concerns around freedom of expression, privacy, surveillance, internet shutdowns, data protection, as well as TFGBV, which is the technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So UPR covers different sectors or different tiers, but we're always looking at those that I've listed when it comes to violations of human rights, especially on the African continent. And not only Africa, because like you said, we submitted a report on the case for Rwanda. And when you look at the recommendations that we're looking at from the previous cycle, Rwanda had gotten recommendations from different countries. They had some from Norway, they had some from Japan. So it's not about Africa as a continent, but it's the United Nations as the UPR stands for that. And we submitted 3 separate reports. We submitted one with the Pan-African Lawyers Union, based in Arusha, Tanzania. We did one with Article 19. We also submitted another one with, the one with Article 19 also had Small Media Foundation in the UK, as well as the Birmingham University in the UK. And then the other third one is the one that we submitted with APC. And that's APC in full is the Association for Progressive Communication and Communications. And that is the one that we went ahead to do the advocacy in Geneva. We do this, it's a process. It's a process because the UPR cycle, first you have civil society organizations draft these reports and the recommendations, then you submit. After submitting, there is what we call the pre-sessions. Now, the pre-sessions, you have to apply to be a speaker. This means that you're going to be, it's a diplomatic mission in this case. You'll be going to, away from contributing to that report, you will present it before the different diplomatic missions and representatives in the room. And this is in Geneva. And after that pre-session, then now you have the final stretch. And I think for Rwanda, it was just last month on the 21st of January, 2026. It's when you closed off the 4th cycle. But we had done the previous, the pre-sessions were in November to December, I think around 27th of November, 2025. So it gave the country some time to look at what had come from civil society and what they could also sort of like preparing for the real, the last dance, if you could call it. And what happens now is that yes, the 21st of January, Rwanda had its hearing before the other states. But now the final sure is, or now what we are all looking at, the anticipation of things, is out of the 286 recommendations that Rwanda received for this cycle, we will know by June, June 2026. We will know how many of those the country is going to be adopting, how many of those will be left out, and all that. So it's we are now in anticipation and looking forward to what the country will be picking up.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for explaining how it works and also what you hope to achieve through this submission. In short, these are countries or civil society or other associations that give recommendation to countries and show them where they are lacking regarding human rights, and then hope that these countries will put measures in place to make sure that these human rights are respected in their countries. Thank you. What were the key concerns raised during the UPR regarding freedom of speech online and expression in Rwanda, to be more specific?
Like I said, we had 3 separate reports, but for the advocacy measures that we did, and well, even all the 3 separate reports that we did with the other organizations, there were 5 issues. There were 5 issues that we looked at. And number 1 was the restrictive legal frameworks on freedom of expression. Number 2 was the institutionalized surveillance and lack of oversight. Issue number 3 was the persistent gender digital divide. And then number 4 was TFGBV, which is the technology facilitated gender-based violence. And then the last one was the weak data protection and accountability framework. Now, the 5 issues had 9 recommendations. So when I was reading the recent updates, and I got to see that Rwanda received 286 recommendations overall. So that means that our 9 recommendations are part of the 286. So it's not always. I remember in the pre-sessions in November, we were only 3 submitting organizations, but which means not all the 286 came from us. So there were other people, but they did not get the opportunity to have to present their case or their issues before the panel. So out of the 5, I could say we were looking at the digital context of Rwanda, but out of the 5, the 2 were very prominent. Number 1 being the TFGBV, the technology facilitated gender-based violence. Not that it is new to the sphere, but it's something that is gaining traction. It's gaining traction not only in Africa, but even across. But for the case of Rwanda, we were looking at examples of how the whole TFGBV is affecting politics in the country. And it is not also isolated for the case of Rwanda. It cuts across in Eastern region or even the West, the South. We are seeing it here in Uganda, where you wake up, you're a political aspirant, but just because someone has on the internet and posted ABCD, that alone, it leads to like self-censure. You're afraid to come out and speak about ABCD because of how your internet image has been painted. In our submission on TFGBV, we talked about how it deters women from public participation and the shrinking civic and political space. We also talked about the psychological harm and the social stigma that silences women's voices in online spaces. We went ahead to talk about the weak enforcement that perpetuates impunity for perpetrators and fails the CEDAW Articles 2, 3, and 7. And lastly, we also talked about the persistent digital misogyny that undermines progress towards SDG 16. This is the Sustainable Development Goal that looks at peace, justice, and institutions. So in our submission, we're also looking at if the government of Rwanda does, adopts this recommendation, this issue, looks at it and addresses it. It could be an example that other African countries could look at and borrow ideas. And before we know it, TFGBV would be a case in the past, it would be addressed. And what were we looking at? Away from having the legal frameworks that point out what amounts to a violation and all this, will there be a place for, away from the damages, but what happens to the victims? What happens to the victims? Can we have something that, away from also deterrence, can we have something that will sort of give them relief, knowing that they reported a case and it has been maybe, okay, fine, has been taken down off the internet, but even the trolls that engage in these kinds of things can learn something from that and not do it again, So those are the things that we're also looking at. Then the other big thing that came up also was the restrictive legal framework on freedom of expression. I know in the pre-session, Her Excellency, the ambassador to the UN from Rwanda, she did mention that there was some reforms being done in the country on the media law and all that. And on the 21st of January, when the Attorney General was also submitting, he alluded to things of the facts. And I see a government that is willing, I see a government that is willing, that is listening.
But not there yet, yes.
Yes, so that would be a very good thing to see what comes out of it.
Okay, yes, thank you for highlighting, especially the TFGBV, because this is really affecting a lot of people. We are talking about Rwanda, but indeed in other countries as well. Coming back to Rwanda, some political activists, human rights defenders, journalists are being very affected by this. And let's hope that with these recommendations that Rwanda will take this seriously and make sure that these people not only get justice, but only that the perpetrators, are held accountable for their actions. And there's also a segment of online surveillance in the report, transnational repression and the right to privacy in Rwanda. Could you go a bit more into detail on this?
Yeah, because that's the right to privacy. It's under the legal frameworks. This is something that we're looking at. In our recommendations, we asked that the government should ensure that digital access is inclusive and equitable for all by removing access barriers for marginalized communities, including rural communities, women, and persons with disabilities. We also further recommended that the government should repeal provisions that unduly criminalize free speech or freedom of speech, including Articles 157, 164, 193, 233, as well as 235 of the 2018 Penal Code, and amend the 2018 Cybercrime Law to ensure that all provisions comply with international human rights standards relating to free speech and expression. When you talk about surveillance, obviously that's also, it was another tier that we looked at. We packaged it as institutionalized surveillance and lack of oversight. We were looking at the constant monitoring that chills activism and deters political participation. Because if you know you're being surveilled, if you know that someone is looking into what you're doing, in a way, as a blogger, as a writer, as an activist, journalist, lawyer, there is a way how you will end up stopping yourself from actually addressing the matter, because you feel like maybe it's not worth it when you look at your security measures. And then we also, still under surveillance, we looked at the absence of the judicial review, which violates privacy rights under Article 1.2. When you look at the Malabo Convention, the cross-border intimidation of exiled critics, which extends to repression by the government of Rwanda, and then the trust in online platforms and digital civic engagement that continues to decline. We listed the 4 under surveillance, and we do hope that the government will look at them and address them, because while you can recommend, while you can speak to governments, it remains at their discretion to either adopt these recommendations or not. However, it's not a moot point for civil society organizations to talk about them, because the more we do talk about these things, we believe the more traction they gain, and it also catches the interest of the people in charge. And that's why I think if you do read our recommendations, recommendation number 5 was specifically on that, where we were saying that guarantee adequate independent oversight mechanisms to ensure state surveillance practices are limited and proportional in accordance with the international human rights standards. Because governments will always have a reason why they do the surveillance. They will always, nothing is done without a reason. And it will always sound legit, like off the ears. You read a report and you be like, this wasn't, in any sense, it was needed. But we do ask that it is done in line with international human rights standards and procedures.
Yes, thank you for going into detail on that. Also, just to highlight that in Rwanda, we have a major issue right now where we have noticed that several high-ranking officials in Rwanda have publicly called on young people to actively participate on social media to neutralize, refute, and fight those who challenge the government or speak about issues of governance. For example, the Freedom of the Net 2022 observed that social media accounts with government affiliations regularly harass individuals who post content considered critical of the government. The report further notes that the Rwandan government has mobilized social media users to counter the views of individuals labeled as enemies of the state. This so-called Twitter army has systematically attacked and discredited individuals and media outlets that criticize the government. The report also explains that some of these social media users are allegedly rewarded for their attacks through appointments or nominations to position within government institutions or private companies linked to the ruling party. With that background in our minds, I have questions regarding this. What would you advise Rwandans who use these digital technologies in a way that violates human rights, particularly those who don't realize that they are committing crimes online?
That's a very interesting revelation, but I can assure you, under the law, you can never claim ignorance to be any reason as to why you're doing something. You're expected to know the law and understand how things go. But this is something that then I would bounce back to the government of Rwanda and the civil society in the area to look at capacity building, because I would like to believe that the internet and technology of things, it's a very volatile, actually that's the word to use. It's a very, it grows at any form. And when you do say that there are people using the internet in any forms backed by the government, but they don't know they are violating ABCD, then it goes back to the government. Can they have structures in place to teach these young people using Twitter on what is the safe usage of things, what would amount to this or that, what would land someone in jail, what would land someone in any holding. And also, it's not only to the government, but also to the civil society in Rwanda, because one of the things that we do at CIPESA is that we teach organizations, human rights lawyers, human rights defenders, journalists about digital resilience. We talk about safety online. We talk about the good usage of the internet. We talk about the law, it's what it says, you know. So perhaps maybe that's also one of the things that CIPESA can look at in capacitating different sects in Rwanda on how to go about this. I will definitely note it down, but I don't see how or why that would be happening. And if it is being backed by the government itself, then that is it's shameful, you know.
Very worrisome, yeah.
Yeah. I will definitely have to dig into it to get to the facts of this, but it's very worrisome, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And also another question regarding that, especially the victims, what can they do to seek justice in an area where there are no institutions where they can seek justice, or at least where can they safely document or speak out about the injustices that they are facing?
Yeah, so that goes back to TFGBV. So I would say, actually, when people need to know that TFGBV is not only for women and children, it cuts across. Even
Correct.
men are attacked online and they're ashamed of things that they've done or not done, you know. And in our recommendations, I think I could check, but it was recommendation 7 or 8. We mentioned we asked that the government should enhance measures and policies to prohibit, investigate, and prosecute TFGBV in line with international human rights standards. And we also further said that the government should provide redress, what you've just mentioned, and reparation as an effective, efficient, and meaningful way of aiding victims of TFGBV, ensuring that justice is achieved. Now, how that would look like, it's completely different when it comes to different countries. I know in Uganda, there is conversations on how that would look like, how are the reparations going to look like, away from taking down what you've posted that has already, harmed me as the person behind it. How do we go on from there? Because it goes back to public trust. How are you going to reshape my name, to rebrand me as the person that you had already tarnished me to be?
These attacks, the effects that they have on a person, on their families, whether they are committed by individuals or government officials, it doesn't matter. The effects are very deep and can cause deep harm to the victims. So it is very important that we keep on talking about this and to make governments aware of the dangers ahead or the dangers that are already existing right now in the digital area. So yes.
I mean, I could add to that. We have had conversations like this here at CIPESA. Just last year, we had a webinar where we were looking at it from the judicial lens of things, because at the end of it, when you're going to fight TFGBV, it's going to be you have to use the law in any way, right?
Yes.
You have to cite the law, you have to see what policies are in place. And it was evident that it was even affecting the women judges, that we have in the country. Some of them, yes, like some of them were, online saying that this is actually a very big issue. Parliamentarians, the women in parliament were also faced with this. And like I said, it's not only for women, but mostly we've seen the numbers growing gradually that do affect women. And the African Union has gone ahead. There is a resolution on this. Particularly, I think it's resolution 522 that talks about protecting of women in online spaces and so forth. So it's a growing trend that we need to look at and find. I will find the resolution. And so TFGBV, it's a growing concern, and civil society organizations have also gone ahead to work against these issues, working with the judiciary, working with different sectors of the government. And it so happens that the African Union has looked at it. We have the resolution on the protection of women against digital violence in Africa. This is the resolution 522 of 2022. It came out in that year, 2022, specifically looking at protecting women against digital violence in Africa. Now, how that looks like, it takes shapes. It can go in politics, it can go in your family, it can go on just normal social media. But in what we've been looking at CIPESA was looking at the elections, at politics. How are women being pushed away or pushed out of political races using the internet?
Yes.
So that goes back to the safe and the harms, the safe use of the internet and the harms that come out of that. Now, going to my parting shots on this, the UPR, back to the point of the Universal Periodic Review, it is a very good instrument. I would say perhaps it's underutilized when it comes to African governments and how we engage with the UN UPR, but there is a growing benefit out of this. For the case of Rwanda, I think we saw a very willing country just from the lineup of the people that showed up on the 21st of January 2026. That alone showed an appetite to address the issues that were coming out. And what was interesting to note was that given this is a platform where governments do look at each other's dirty linen when it comes to human rights, it was interesting to see Rwanda also making recommendations to other countries. Rwanda went ahead to submit recommendations to countries like Mauritania, Nepal, Oman, Austria, Georgia. So that alone shows, and most of the things that they were looking at, they're the things that we had also submitted for Rwanda to look at. I'll give you an example. For Georgia, Rwanda recommended that the government of Georgia, this is in Europe, should expand free legal aid and trauma-informed psychological services for survivors of violence against women and domestic violence, and also to accelerate the adoption of the draft law on restorative justice. And those are the things that we were also hoping that Rwanda could address back home. So if a country is able to pick an issue from another country, yet it's actually already suffering from that same issue, we do hope that June will bring good results from the country. They would have adopted
Yes.
the recommendations that we put up towards the better human rights environment in the country.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia.
It's a call to the government of Rwanda to continue taking serious the recommendations that come from the civil society when it comes to human rights issues, especially on the digital context. And we do look forward to a good report in June later this year on the number of recommendations that the country would have decided on adopting and addressing. Together, we look forward to a better human rights environment in Rwanda, in East Africa, and across the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And with that powerful message, we have come to the end of today's conversation. Thank you all to everyone who tuned in today, and a heartfelt thank you to our incredible guest, Patricia Ainembabazi, for her amazing contribution to today's conversation, mainly regarding human rights situation in Rwanda, especially in the context of the digital technology. And this is a work in progress, and we have to keep on fighting for change. We have to keep on fighting for a better tomorrow for everyone. As we say in Kinyarwanda, Imana ifasha uwifashije. God helps those who help themselves. Let that be a call for all of us, a call for action. If you believe in democracy, human dignity, and the rule of law, now is not the time to look away. We must reject complicity through silence. We must raise our voices, and we must stand in solidarity with those who cannot speak freely. Until next time, take care and stay engaged.
Yeah.